Hi, welcome back, everyone. We will begin promptly at 1 o'clock. All right, good afternoon and welcome back to day 4, the final day of ASI's ISO 14001 overview webinar. I'm Davie Connors. I'm the Environmental Program Consultant with the Division of Environmental Assistance and Customer Service. And today you will hear from myself and Dawn, also Environmental Program Consultant with DEECS. You'll also hear from Tim Havens. He is an ESI intern. And then assisting with us today is Shrusti Patel, and she is an ESI intern as well. We want to again thank our partners, Land of Sky Regional Council and Waste Reduction Partners, a 20-year-old pollution prevention program that provides customized on-site technical assistance, and they also allow us to use this webinar platform. I want to go over a few housekeeping reminders before we begin, same as it's been the last few days. If you have any audio issues, click on the audio button and you can click on phone call. It will give you a phone number to call along with an access code. And then you can use your phone's audio instead of your computer's audio. If you have any other computer issues, feel free to raise your hand. There are handouts available. Today's handouts are the presentation, and there's also a certificate of completion for your training records for this course. This webinar will be recorded, so you will have access to it. We will get it up on the website probably about a week after this training ends, and so you will have access to it if you want to go back and look at any of the slides or any of the recordings. All right, everyone came in muted, so it should be showing up as like a little red button for you. But if you want to ask a question or have a comment, like I've said before, this is very interactive. We want your participation. So please feel free to either raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can ask a question, or just type up your question in the question box and Tim or Shrusti or Don or I will read it out loud and then we will answer it that way. Okay, so let's go over quickly what we're going to talk about today. We've already done the welcome. We're going to be looking at emergency preparedness and response, which is clause 8.2, monitoring and measuring, which is clause 9.1.1, compliance evaluation, which is 9.1.2, internal auditing, which is 9.2.1 and 9.2.2, and management review, which is 9.3. 3. Then we will go on into corrective action and continual improvement, which is all of clause 10. So far, we have gone over the kind of framework, the planning, and the do. Now we are in the check and the act phase of the ISO 14001 standard. So what we talked about previously, just want to go over it briefly and then see if you guys have any questions. It wasn't yesterday. I need to change that. It was Tuesday's material, but we talked about resources. You want to make sure that your EMS has the available resources necessary for it to achieve its functions, and those could be financial, personnel, or even site-specific resources. You want to make sure that your staff that is working with any kind of environmental issues is competent, and you want to make sure that there is awareness of your EMS and your policy. And then we also spoke about communication. That was internal and external communication and what needs to be communicated, how best to do that. The standard is a little bit prescriptive on certain things that you have to communicate, but then allows you to make those decisions for other things that you want to communicate, but you do have to have documentation of communication. And then we talked about documentation and document control. And that is, those are your SOPs, your manuals, your reports, your records, all of those things that are necessary for your EMS to continue functioning as it should. And then we looked at operational control, environmental requirements, and outsourced processes. And this is where we looked at how can you control the things that could potentially go wrong, either your risks and opportunities, your environmental aspects, emergency situations, all of that type of thing. What can you do to control those things? And then also outsource processes, which are looking more at contractors and life cycle analysis. Okay, that was a quick rundown of all the stuff that we did on Tuesday. Are there any questions before we move on to new material?
I do not see any at this time, Davey.
Okay, excellent. Well, you guys know we are completely open to questions. Feel free to interrupt us, raise your hand, pop them in the question box. We're happy to hear from you at any point. Okay, so today we're going to talk about operations, performance evaluation, and improvement. So these are the last little bit of clause 8, and then all of clause 9 and clause 10. So we'll start with emergency preparedness and response. The standard says that the organization shall establish, implement, control, and maintain processes to prepare for and respond to potential emergency situations that you identified in 611. The organization shall prepare to respond by planning actions to prevent or mitigate adverse environmental impacts, shall respond to actual emergency situations, shall take actions to prevent or mitigate consequences of emergency situations, shall periodically test the planned response actions where practicable, shall periodically review and revise processes and planned response actions, in particular after the occurrence of an actual emergency situation or a test, and then shall provide relevant information and training related to emergency preparedness and response. And then finally, the organization shall maintain documented information to the extent necessary to have confidence that the processes are carried out as planned. So we're going to break this down a little bit and look at each little piece a little bit more, but the standard puts more emphasis on preparing ahead of an emergency to mitigate any kind of environmental impact that might arise. So even before an emergency situation arises, what can you do to reduce the environmental impact should it happen? And we have some examples that we'll go over as well. Okay, so take action to prevent or mitigate the consequences of emergency situations appropriate to the magnitude of the emergency and the potential environmental impact. So before an emergency situation arises, what can you do to reduce the impact? We have an example here, and Marcia mentioned this the other day when we were talking. We have one of our sites has a railroad track that runs very near to it, similar situation to this building and railroad track. This is not the actual site itself, but um, things can happen. Trains can derail, and the organization needs to think about, okay, well, what if an emergency did happen? What if a train did derail and it hit our building? What do we need to do to prepare for that? So, this is again, not a real example from any of our situations, but it's just an example showing you that these things can happen. So in this case, you would want to be very aware of what is on that side of the building. Do you have anything that is explosive? Do you have any gas? Do you have any hazardous waste that would spill if something like this happened? So you want to be very mindful of the potential um, consequences of what could happen if there was an emergency. Another example for you, and this is a real life one where uh, we have a facility that has a AST, an above ground storage tank, and the tank contains petroleum product, just like this one here. And they're in a low-lying area that is prone to hurricanes. And so in the case of this example, there was a hurricane. I can't remember which one it was. Unfortunately, we've had so many recently that resulted in a lot of flooding that I'm not sure which it was. But where the AST actually floated, again, not a real picture. It is a real picture of something that's happened, but not of the facility that I'm talking about. But where the AST floated, um, because it was not completely full. And the waters rose, so it floated. And when they came back to it, there were branches underneath the AST. They were extremely lucky in that it didn't break any of the pipes, so there wasn't an environmental hazard that was associated with this or an environmental impact. But it showed them, wow, this is an area where we really need to be cautious of. So what they did was they created secondary containment. Um, they created with walls so that the water would have to rise up above those walls in order to get to the AST to make it float. And then they also strapped it down. And that's something that's very common with underground storage tanks, is to strap it down and have it secured so that even if the water does rise, um, like the groundwater, it won't float up, but it's not as common in ASTs, so above ground storage tanks. So in this case, it's something where it's something that you have to think about. How can we prevent an environmental impact before an emergency happens? Okay, so you want to periodically test the planned response where practicable. And this is to see if your planned response is working the way that you think that it should. Um, just like if you have you know, uh, a fire drill, you want to test it. And it says where practicable. There's some things where it's very in it's not necessarily something that you could test without actually having the emergency happen. But could you do a tabletop exercise where you thought about all of the different things, the different permeations of what could happen? Um, so is there some way where you can test it even without actually going through the process? And then you want to periodically review and revise the processes and planned responses, in particular after an emergency situation. So this review could be done during your management review, or it could be done separately. Um, And it should be done after uh, every actual emergency or every test. And then when you're reviewing it, you want to check, did it go as planned? And can the process be improved? Okay, the next part of the standard says that you want to provide relevant information and training related to emergency preparedness and response as appropriate to relevant interested parties, including persons working under its control. So you want to train your employees, obviously. That one's the obvious one that you think of. But this is broader than that. It talks about interested parties. So who else might be involved? Well, definitely your contractors or your suppliers might need to know some things about emergency situations and procedures, what to do. We have a landfill in the program that receives waste, and so they have posted all around their place signs that say, you know, if there's an emergency, call this number, and what to do. And they have spill kits around there as well, so that even if it's a contractor that's coming in, they still have access to that information. And then I want to make a note here that this goes beyond just your employees and your contractors to more than just that. Who else might be an interested party? So in this picture, you have a nuclear power plant that is very close to houses. So in this case, you would want to have your interested parties would be the people who live in the neighborhood surrounding that nuclear power plant. If there was some kind of, God forbid, nuclear emergency there, where there was a meltdown, whatever, you would want to be able to very quickly tell the people in that neighborhood what was going on, and you would need them to know what that was. So if you had an alarm system or something that went off, okay, but then what do they do? How do they respond to that? What is there a evacuation plan? Is there some way to communicate with those homeowners? Um, Another example is a first responder or fire marshal. You know, recently there was that fire at the fertilizer plant. Fertilizer, as you guys know, can be very explosive. And so when the fire started, they needed to contact very quickly their first responders and their fire marshal and get that under control. But the fire marshal has to know what is going on at that site, what is the emergency response plan so that they can respond. So that would be another example of a interested party. And the last example I have for you is your regulators or your inspectors. So I had, when I was uh, an inspector, I had a landfill that caught on fire, and I didn't hear about it from the person who was working there. I didn't hear about it from the landfill operator. I heard about it from the media. And so I called up my landfill and I was like, whoa, what guys, what's going on? And why have you not notified me? Um, and they said, well, it wasn't actually at the landfill. It wasn't at the permitted site. It was at the recycling site next to me. And it's still ours, but it's not permitted. So we didn't have to notify you, which was legitimate. But I told them, and I'll tell you guys the same thing, you still should, so that when the regulator finds out about it, it's not through the media, it's not through, you know, hearing about it by word of mouth or whatever, it's from the source. And so they know what's going on and they can respond appropriately. So those are just some examples of relevant interested parties that go beyond your employees and your contractors. Okay, well, now we'll move along to performance evaluation. Don, do you want to take over?
Yes, indeed. Thank you,
Excellent.
Davy.
And just while he's switching screens, do you guys have any questions about emergency preparedness and response?
I'm not seeing any at the moment, but if you have one, just feel free to raise your hand and drop it in the question box.
Excellent.
Let's see. Trying to get this full Okay. How about now? Can you see that?
Yes, that's perfect.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining us, everyone. Day 4 of this overview, and you've been a fantastic audience. We really do appreciate your input and taking this journey along with us. As Davey mentioned, we're going to start off now with monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. In our module series, we go much deeper, of course, than we do in the overview. So we can actually, I mean, we dedicate half a day to this. So, but I think we can do it justice with a brief summary here. So let's begin. So the standard states now. Yeah, save that one for a minute. The standard states in 911 that the organization shall monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate its environmental performance. The organization shall determine what needs to be monitored and measured, your methods for monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation to ensure valid results, the criteria against which the organization will evaluate its environmental performance, and appropriate indicators. When monitoring and measuring shall be performed, and when the results from monitoring and measurement shall be analyzed and evaluated. And of course, the organization shall ensure that calibrated or verified monitoring and measurement equipment is used and maintained as appropriate. Now, from the 2004 standard to 2015, this clause is no longer limited to significant impacts. It no longer talks about key characteristics. What it did add is an analysis and evaluation piece. So when determining what should be monitored and measured, in addition to progress on environmental objectives, the organization should take into account its significant environmental aspects, compliance obligations, and operational controls. To continue, the organization shall evaluate its environmental performance and the effectiveness of the EMS. The organization shall communicate relevant environmental performance information both internally and externally as identified in its communication process and by its compliance obligations. So it's a bit subjective there as far as what you are required to do versus what you choose to do. And the organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation results. So the methods used by the organization to monitor and measure, analyze, and evaluate should be defined in your EMS. This in order to ensure that the timing of monitoring and measurement is coordinated with the need for analysis and evaluation results, so that the results of monitoring and measurements are reliable, reproducible, and traceable. This is very important. Reliable, reproducible, and traceable. The analysis and evaluation are reliable and reproducible and enable the organization to report any trends. A great tool to have. The environmental performance analysis and evaluation results should be reported to those with responsibility and authority to initiate the appropriate action. So that should be outlined in your EMS. So the clause states that the organization shall evaluate its environmental performance and the effectiveness of the environmental management system. This can be done by many ways, by your EMR or equivalent. Your EMR, for those who aren't familiar with that, it's a bit outdated term. It was referred to the environmental management representative. Now at times it's your EHS personnel, environmental health and safety, okay? By the EMS team itself, by middle management, and especially during top management review. After all, that's where your support is going to come from in fortifying your EMS. We spoke about communication, not only just briefly now, but in our previous overview sessions. The standard states that the organization shall communicate relevant environmental performance information, both internally and externally, as identified in its communication processes as required by its compliance obligations. Okay, just mentioned that. So internally, this can include your EMS boards, your Gemba walks, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more here in a moment, leadership boards, training, emails, newsletters. Microsoft Teams has multiple tools that you can utilize now. Externally, you've got regulatory agencies, websites, newsletters, news and press releases, as Davey just mentioned, billboards, even vehicle magnetic signage. Okay? As a contractor way back in the day, we covered 25 states a year, 99.99% on the road, and we made use of that as well. Now, Gimbal Walks, I've been privileged to be part of that. I've witnessed them as an auditor and an inspector. If you're not familiar with that term, I know many of you are, but no matter how small or how large your business model is, it is a vital tool to consider. It's very effective. Gimbal walks denote the action of going to see the actual process, to understand the work, to ask questions, and learn. It is also known as one fundamental part of lean management philosophy. At Toyota, it was developed on the concept of the Gemba walk. It's a common issue when a complex project is underway that the people involved sometimes lose sight of the detailed work that goes into the very process they are trying to improve. So by focusing on the operation, listening to employees, and taking the time after Gemba walk to reflect on what action is needed, the upper management can foster a cooperative atmosphere in the businesses. Again, these are group gatherings throughout the manufacturing lines, the external hallways, perhaps looking into the system, and the walkabouts. They're group gatherings when you are processing this and keeping your fingers on the pulse of just what is going on. It's a great way to share concepts and ideas, much better than a static suggestion box on a wall. True? It's real time information that you can make use, and it's a really great bonding opportunity with all staff involved. Tim, I'm going to hand this off for you for the moment.
And I'll pick it up. So this is 9.1.2, and we're going to discuss evaluation of compliance. So the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain the process needed to evaluate fulfillment of its compliance obligations. The organization shall determine the frequency that compliance will be evaluated, evaluate compliance and take action if needed, maintain knowledge and understanding of its compliance status. And this is where you want to make sure your I's are dotted and T's are crossed. If there were any compliance action or activity, in-house or regulatory, make sure it's closed properly and both sides are satisfied with the outcome. Or else later you may find out that it wasn't closed, and that would be rather unfortunate. So the organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the compliance evaluation results. So the frequency and timing of compliance evaluation varies based on the importance of the requirement, variations in operating conditions, organization's past performance, changes in compliance obligations. ORIS can use a variety of methods to maintain its knowledge and understanding of compliance status. However, all compliance obligations need to be evaluated periodically. So this is something that's it's static. If compliance obligations result in failure to adhere to legal requirements, then the organization needs to determine and implement actions necessary to achieve compliance. So this might require communication with regulatory agency, an agreement on the course of action, and an agreement on the course of action to meet legal requirements. So non-compliance isn't necessarily a non-conformity. and that needs to be corrected. So, and now I'm going to pass it back
Okay.
to.
Now, yeah, before we go back to Davey, are there any questions for monitoring and measurement or compliance evaluation? Okay, if not, we'll move on to Davey and internal auditing.
Excellent. So can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So for internal auditor, which is 921, the standard says that the organization shall conduct internal audits at planned intervals to provide information on whether the EMS conforms to the organization's own requirements for the EMS and the requirements of the ISO 14001 standard. And is it effectively implemented and maintained? So when we are doing a second party audit, which is not the same as an internal audit, but when we are conducting an audit, we are always looking at both not only what the actual standard says, so what it says in this paper, but also what your EMS says. If your EMS manual says that you guys are going to do something once a year, are you guys actually doing it once a year? If your EMS manual says that you are going to do something in a certain way, or one of your SOPs say that you're going to do something in a certain way, are you doing it in that way? You are held or should be held as an internal audit as accountable to what you say you are going to do as you are to what the ISO standard says that you shall do. So you want to make sure you're looking at both of those. Okay, so it says that it must be conducted at planned intervals. The planned interval is up to you. From talking to third-party auditors, we've often seen that they like to see that each element be audited at least annually, but some elements, depending on your findings, may require audits more frequently. So is your system new? Have you interviewed your employees to see if they understand the policy? That's a big one that we see when we're doing audits, that a lot of the employees don't know that there's an environmental policy. They don't know how they relate to that policy. So that's one of the reasons why we recommend putting it somewhere where they have it all the time. Do they know that they have an EMS? Do they know what their significant aspects are? Do they really think, or do you really think rather, that once a year would suffice for a given topic? So you guys determine how frequently you're going to audit, and you don't have to audit each area or each element at the same rate. You can break it up and do one audit every month for each of the elements. You can break it up in terms of areas of where you are auditing, and some of those might need to be audited more than once a year. All right, so and then what are you auditing for? Your requirements that you have set within your own EMS, your EMS conformance to the standard, and is the EMS functioning as it should? Is it being implemented and maintained? The standard goes on to say that the organization shall establish, implement, and maintain an internal audit program, including the frequency, methods, responsibilities, planning requirements, and reporting of its internal audits. When establishing the internal audit program, the organization shall take into consideration the environmental importance of the process concerned, changes affecting the organization, and the results of previous audits. So the organization shall define audit criteria and scope of each audit. Like I said, not each audit doesn't have to be of the entirety of all of the elements and the entirety of all of your processes. You want to select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. So you want to make sure your auditors aren't auditing something that they have direct control over or input in, because that's not objective. You want to ensure, or you shall ensure, that the results of the audit are reported to relevant management. And the organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the implementation of the audit program and the audit results. So let's break this down a little bit. When we're talking about audit, the audit plan must include these things. The frequency, that's pretty obvious. How often will you audit each element and or process? What method are you going to use? Is there going to be a checklist? Are you going to have a team? Are you going to hire a contractor? Is there any pre-work that's involved? And then responsibilities. Okay, who is going to manage the audit? Is there going to be a lead auditor? Is there going to be a team of auditors? Who are those team members going to be? Who is the management that this audit is going to be reported to? Who is going to be audited? Who are the auditees? And then planning requirements. What do you need in order to plan for the audit? Do you need training of your auditors? Do you need forms, procedures, etc.? And then finally, reporting. How will you document the findings of what happened when a nonconformity is documented? And who is it going to be reported to? So when you are developing your audit schedule, you want to think about the impact of individual processes. Those processes that have a larger impact, whether it's actual impact or potential impact, may need to be reviewed more frequently. If there have been changes, then you may want to review those operations sooner than operations that have been in place and verified previously. If there are findings from a previous audit, for example, then you may want to review those areas sooner to make sure that the changes that you implemented are being effective. Audits include more than just one internal audit. Also look at third-party audits, your compliance audits, any customer complaints, and other CARs that have been generated. So those things could potentially lead you to audit an area more frequently. And then when you are developing the audit plan, you must consider the environmental importance of the process, any changes to your organization, the results of previous audits, and have you met the shall statements? If you meet them the first time, then why would you ever audit again? Well, things change. People change. People might not follow procedures if they're not being checked on. Processes and technologies may have changed. Maybe somebody moved one of your recycling bins or removed it. Also, you can't do continual improvement if you don't know what's actually happening on the floor of your organization. And maybe you found a better way to do things. Auditing often reveals different ways of doing things. So, oops, I went a little too fast there. Sorry about that. Okay, so you might have a matrix similar to this where you are looking at the different areas of the standard and when you will audit them. You could also have a matrix where instead of looking at the elements of the standard, you're looking at your different processes and how often. Okay, and your organization must define the audit criteria and the scope of each audit. That's what we were just talking about. It doesn't have to be all done at once. The scope of each audit could be the element or the process. Select objective and impartial auditors, perform audit in an objective and impartial way, and then report those results to management. You must document both the process and the results to demonstrate evidence of implementation. Okay, so for an EMS audit, the requirements can be the ISO 14001 shall statements. This is your audit criteria, your EMS procedures, your SOPs, your guidance, your work instructions, maybe your schedules. So when are you going to audit? When are you supposed to have meetings? When are you supposed to calibrate? Maybe it's your plans, your objectives. Are you on target with those objectives? Are you doing the things that you said that you were going to do in order to achieve those objectives? And maybe it's looking at your responsibility matrix. You're looking at your EMS manual, your operational controls, and your monitoring matrix. So all of these things are things that you look at when you are auditing.
Hey, Davey, we've got a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Juan was curious, what are the requirements for an internal auditor?
Excellent question. That's actually what we're going to talk about next. So the standard doesn't say that an internal auditor has to be anyone in particular, or has to have any kind of certain training. However, um, it does say that you have to make sure that it's impartial. I'm actually going to open up real quick to the standard. So let's see here. So you need to, it says that you need to select auditors and conduct audits to ensure objectivity and impartiality of the audit process. So it really doesn't mandate that you have to have any kind of training, although it's a very good idea to give your auditors some kind of training on how to audit. And then it's also a good idea to have specific ideas in mind of who you're looking for in an auditor. So I'll go over those here real quick. So maybe let's do this. There we go. Who is an auditor? So Juan, if I don't answer your question in the next couple of slides, we'll come back and see if I can, okay? So this is the person with the competence to conduct an audit. So competence means two things. One is that they have the personal attributes listed in the standard, and there are some listed in the 19,001 standard, and we'll go over those. And a person with the ability to apply the skills and knowledge gained through education, training, and work experience to conduct an audit. So there are some certain traits of a good auditor. You want someone who is ethical, and that means they are fair, they are sincere, they're honest and discreet. You want someone who is open-minded. For example, someone who is willing to consider alternative ideas and points of view. You want someone who is diplomatic. You want them to be tactful in dealing with people. You want them to be observant, actively looking around at their physical surroundings and the activities that are going on, and observing. You want someone to be perceptive, so you want them to be very aware and have understanding of situations. You want them to be, versatile, able to adapt to different situations. You want them to be tenacious. Sometimes when you're asking questions of an auditee, they won't always give you a direct answer, and you have to keep asking that question over and over again in order to get an answer, and maybe in slightly different ways. But you do have to be tenacious. You have to be able to be focused and not distracted by somebody talking about something else that, you know. You want them to be decisive, able to reach a timely conclusion based on logical reasoning and analysis. You want them to be self-reliant, able to act and function independently while interacting with others. You want them to act with fortitude. So that means that they are able to act responsibly and ethically, even though the actions may not always be popular. Sometimes it's not. and may sometimes result in disagreement or confrontation. Now, disagreement and confrontation doesn't necessarily, or should not mean that it is a fight or an argument. That's that whole diplomatic thing where you want someone who is able to thread that needle of um, uh, being diplomatic, being able to disagree without it being an argument. You want someone who is open to improvement. The whole point of an audit is to continually improve, to see what areas that need to be improved. So someone who's open-minded enough to be open to improvement, someone who is culturally sensitive, respectful of other people's cultures, of the people that they're auditing, and someone who is collaborative. So they need to be able to work well with others in that audit team. And then traits of the knowledge and skills of a good auditor, you want them to be able to apply auditing principles, procedures, and methods. You want them to be able to plan and organize the work effectively, conduct an audit within the agreed time schedule, prioritize and focus on matters of significance, collect information through effective interviewing, listening, observing, reviewing documents, records, and data. You have to understand and consider experts' opinions and understand the appropriateness and consequences of using sampling techniques for auditing. They need to be able to verify the relevance and accuracy of collected information, confirm this sufficiency and appropriateness of the audit evidence to support audit findings and conclusions, access those factors that may affect the reliability of the audit finding and conclusion, use Word documents and to record audit activities, document audit findings, and prepare appropriate audit reports, maintain the confidentiality and security of information, data, documents, and records, and communicate effectively, both orally and written. And then finally, understand the types of risks associated with auditing. So that's a lot of stuff that you're asking from an auditor. So I think it does require quite a bit of training in order for them to be effective auditors. So those aren't requirements in terms of what the standard requires. The standard simply requires that they be objective and impartial. But in terms of what makes a good auditor, those are things that we feel like make a good auditor. So Juan, does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay,
it does indeed. Thank you, Davey.
okay, excellent. All right, any other questions before we move on? Not
Don't
seeing any?
see any. No.
Okay. All right, Dawn, I think you're up next.
Yes, indeed. Let me redock some things. And I will take the screen. Are you seeing that okay?
Yes.
Whoops, it disappeared on me. There we go. All right. Thank you, Davey. And with that, let's move into 9.3, Management Review. Now, the 2015 standard states that top management shall review the organization's EMS at planned intervals to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. Now, suitability refers to how the environmental management system fits the organization, its operations, culture, and business systems. Adequacy refers to whether it meets the requirements of this international standard and is implemented appropriately. And effectiveness refers to whether it is indeed achieving the desired results. So management review shall include consideration of the following: the status of actions from previous management reviews, and they've got changes for this in this most recent standard regarding external and internal issues that are relevant to the EMS, needs and expectations of interested parties, including compliance obligations, the organization's significant environmental aspects, and risks and opportunities. So the management review should be high level. It does not, however, need to be an exhaustive review of detailed information. The management review topics need not be addressed all at once. The review may take place over a period of time and can be part of regularly scheduled management activities, such as board or operational meetings. It does not need to be a separate activity. Management review shall include consideration of, well, the extent to which environmental objectives have been achieved. Okay? What is your progress? Information on the organization's environmental performance. I'm sorry, trying to move this out of the way. Let me repeat that. Information on the organization's environmental performance, including trends in nonconformities and corrective actions, monitoring and measurement results, fulfillment of its compliance obligations, and your audit results. The management review shall include consideration of adequacy of resources, relevant communications from interested parties, including complaints, and opportunities for continual improvement. Now, regarding complaints, relevant complaints received from interested parties are reviewed by top management to determine opportunities for improvement. Okay, it's a learning opportunity. Constructive criticism sometimes. Okay, remember, resources include money, people, equipment, technology, or anything needed to implement, maintain, and continually improve your EMS. Now, outputs from management review shall include conclusions on the continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS, decisions related to continual improvement opportunities, decisions related to any need for changes to the EMS, including resources. Okay, any need for changes, all about continual improvement. Actions if needed when environmental objectives have not been achieved. Okay. So the standard states that the output from the management review shall include any decisions and actions related to possible changes to environmental policy, objectives, targets, and any other elements in the EMS that are consistent with the commitment to continual improvement. It did not specifically include suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness as an outcome. Okay. Suitability, again, I've already repeated that. So it's a bit subjective with that, right? But it will provide a strong foundation for success. I think you'd all agree. Now, outputs from management review shall include opportunities to improve the integration of the EMS with other business processes, any implications for the strategic direction of the organization, and of course, the organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the results of these management reviews. Now, documenting what decisions management has made relative to your EMS and how it aligns with your business processes and strategic direction of the organization is another way to show leadership by top management. And of course, some of you may have seen something familiar with the recording of minutes here shown on your PowerPoint, management review minutes. Okay? It's documented information. It's part of that. Yeah, it's not cookie cut. You can develop something of similar to this that fits your organization and your needs. Okay. Are there any questions at this time? Because we're about to move into improvement, which is section 10. And do we need a break for anyone?
I'm not seeing any questions at the moment.
Well, we can continue on if everybody would like. Now in section 10, we do have a couple of exercises to do. We're going to try to do them together. So it'll be live exercises at the end here. Actually involve root cause analysis, but if you'd like, we'll move on. Okay. So in clause 10.1 and 10.2 of the standard, it states the organization shall determine opportunities for improvement and implement the necessary changes to achieve intended outcomes of its EMS. Now, when a nonconformity occurs, organizations shall react to the nonconformity, right? And as applicable, take action to control and correct it, right? Deal with the consequences, including possible mitigating adverse environmental impacts, all right? Evaluate the need for action to eliminate the causes of the nonconformity. This could be done by reviewing the nonconformity, determining the causes of the nonconformity, and determining if similar nonconformities exist or could potentially occur. This is what we really look for in a lot of ESI members. Yeah, again, ESI is not a shield against nonconformities or noncompliances. If an issue occurs, okay, now how did you deal with it? What were the results? What were your responses? And how are you going to implement in your EMS the best SOPs or pathways to prevent it from happening again, or at least minimize it? All right, that's very important. You can also implement any action needed, of course. Review the effectiveness of any corrective action taken. Was it indeed effective? How can you improve upon that? Make changes to the EMS if necessary. Again, I mentioned that. So the organization should consider the results from analysis and evaluation of environmental performance, evaluation of compliance, internal audits, and management review when taking action to improve. Now, examples of improvement include corrective action, continual improvement, any breakthrough change, how about innovations, or even reorganization? Okay. Corrective actions shall be appropriate to the significance of the effects of the nonconformities encountered, including the environmental impacts. The organization shall retain documented information as evidence of the nature of these nonconformities and any subsequent actions that are taken, the result of any corrective action, and the organization shall continually improve the suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness of the EMS to enhance the environmental performance. Now, one of the key purposes of an environmental management system is to act as a preventative tool. The concept of preventative action is captured in the standard elsewhere in 4.1, understanding the organization and its context, and 6.1, actions to address risks and opportunities. Okay. I think you've heard me say it before. These are learning opportunities. Many times, of course, it's based on experience, but how can you improve your training if training's involved? Was that subpar? So the rate, extent, and time scale of actions that support continual improvement are determined by the organization. Environmental performance can be enhanced by applying the environmental management system as a whole or improving one or more of its elements. That's why timely reviews, timely updates are very important, and especially if you have an incident. It's a great time to review your EMS. Now we're going to move into the root cause. And again, here in a little bit, we'll have a couple of exercises to do together. A root cause is a factor that caused a non-conformance and should be permanently eliminated through process improvement. Otherwise, it does what? It repeats. The root cause analysis is a collective term that describes a wide range of approaches, tools, and techniques used to uncover causes of problems. So a root cause analysis is an essential part of any business activity. Routine analysis of business situations that did not result in the expected outcome and the development of actions to correct that result and prevent a reoccurrence of that situation is a fundamental element of certified management systems. An effective root cause analysis process should provide a clear understanding of exactly how proposed solutions meet their goal. A structured approach is necessary in order to achieve the maximum benefits from the process. The root cause is the evil at the bottom that sets in motion the entire cause and effect chain causing the problem or problems. And some root cause analysis approaches are geared more toward identifying true root causes than others. Some are more general problem-solving techniques, while others simply offer support for the core activity of the root cause analysis. So it states here, try to avoid operator error as a root cause. And that can be a bit touchy. And why? Well, and sometimes it just is, but many times, operator error can also imply that the operator is willfully or in neglect doing things wrong when it is very possible that they just don't know the correct or expected way, meaning lack of experience, unsatisfactory training. Okay. So there you try to shore up training needs, perhaps signage, or there's a lack thereof, unclear or non-existent work instructions, resources, not enough employees, right? Understaffed. I think many of us are going through that currently, especially in the past year or so, or two. These are more likely your true root causes. And there are some bona fide examples of neglect. I've seen them through the years as an inspector, as an auditor, as a contractor, but many times, I've seen many more times that it's here. It's usually a lack of experience or training. And once that is resolved, hey, that staff is good to go. Now, in determining root cause, there are a few tools to say the less. Wow, I'm not going to list all these, okay? But they are definitely out there. And again, it's going to fit your business model and how the depth that you're searching for and how you're trying to remedy the root cause. All right. It's a multitude of methods at your fingertips. So one exercise that we've got, we call it the 5 whys. It can go on forever, however. But let me give you a little background on this one, the 5 whys. It's one of the most common root cause analysis techniques. The technique was originally developed by Toyota again. Remember, sound familiar with Gemba Walk? All right, but by Toyota during the evolution of its manufacturing methodologies. The intent of the process is to ensure that the underlying causes are identified and not merely superficial symptoms. Right? The technique involves asking, why did this happen, to uncover the underlying problem. Then asking, why did this happen again, until that root cause is identified. The tool has seen widespread use beyond Toyota. It's now used with lean manufacturing, Six Sigma, and so on. And of course, ESI overview training, right? So one of the scenarios, I've got a few at my fingertips, but one of the scenarios is cardboard is banned from the landfill. Okay? Many landfills have cardboard bans. The facility has been fined for sending cardboard to the landfill previously. It's occurred again, though. Upon inspection of the general waste dumpster, it is obvious that cardboard is being thrown into the landfill dumpster once again. So if anybody has any starting points for this and we can trickle on down, let's use the 5 whys. Okay? Cardboard should go into the recycling bin, correct? Not the landfill, all right? They've already experienced fines from this, but it's still occurring. Does anybody have a starting point as to why this has occurred?
Okay, we have employees are not trained from Michael Malloy and
Okay,
lack of knowledge. So similar from Bianca.
yeah, okay. So employees aren't trained, lack of knowledge. Why?
Okay, so why are employees not trained? Oh, excellent. Bianca says insufficient training resources.
Okay, great. Why?
Okay, so production is number one. So I
Uh,
think that means like the number one priority is production.
yeah. Why? And I'm not going to torment y'all all day, but we could do this all day, couldn't we?
Because if
Yeah,
it is not a requirement, it will not be enforced. Excellent.
exactly.
And then we have also a lack of upper management focus on environmental training and no ownership over the recycling initiatives. Those are great ideas and
Yes,
examples.
indeed. Yes, indeed. So,
Excellent.
and just interrupt me if you need to with any others, but so one way we can solve this is it's a great opportunity to instill this into your EMS, correct? Especially with training, with staff awareness of the recycling program, maybe some new
Mhm.
signage throughout the facility, and bring it to the attention of upper management, because which shouldn't be hard to do, especially if they've been fined before.
Absolutely. And we have one more comment. This
Mm,
is a product that does not produce a revenue stream, even though it does prevent a loss of the bottom line.
very
So
good.
yeah,
Thank you
absolutely.
so much. Well, we have another little exercise, and let me make sure. Yeah, one of my previous one that we've talked about before, besides say cardboard and the dumpster, would be commingled recycling, which is just like that, but inside the facility, like in the cafeteria area, if you have that, because we have seen from facilities where they've discussed with us, the recycling company, when they come to pick it up, they have rejected it and left it behind. Why? Well, because staff are commingling non-recyclable waste streams within the one that they're supposed to be picking up. So that can bring upon some issues with those contracts. True. So again, better training, better awareness, etc. And what's sad, it was at one site, they had a beautiful layout along the floor, along the wall, on the containers. It was all spelled out for you, but you still saw it occurring. So again, a great exercise for the 5 whys to apply to something like that. Now, we have something we go a little more in depth with. It's called the fishbone diagram. Now, this is a good method for more complex issues that may have multiple underlying causes. It helps by breaking down the possible causes into 6 basic categories, which you see on the screen. You can actually combine this with the 5 whys and break it down even further into primary, secondary, and potentially further causes. So with this, we have our 6 areas: equipment, process, people, materials, environment, and management. Then you have your overall problem. And as you can see, the equipment includes machinery, calibrations, process, how's the work done, people, the human element that's involved, your materials, the component or raw materials involved, your environment, your buildings, logistics, the space that's being used, and management, which we just mentioned in one of the whys, higher level decisions or rules, and how is that being accepted. So we'll keep this in mind, and what I'll probably do, I'm going to go ahead on a couple of slides, but then I'm going to come back to this diagram, okay, to help us out. So a little background on this one, okay? This is a powder coating line, right? The tall enclosure that is open on the end is a tunnel that contains multiple spray nozzles. Each of the smaller metal boxes attached on the side at the bottom contain large quantities of liquid. Powder coating typically has multi-stage cleaning and etching process that occurs prior to the spraying of dry powder paint. The painted part then goes through a curing oven where the paint melts together and integrates with the part itself through the etched areas. All right. So background of facility, the site has 3 lines. Okay. It's an electroplating dip line, a powder coating line, and a rarely used zinc phosphating line. The electrocoating and powder coating lines both operate 3 shifts, 5 to 6 days a week. There's a laboratory tech that works on each shift to test the bath chemistry of each stage on both lines. Okay? They also perform wastewater pretreatment functions and perform reporting functions related to these operations. Now, the layout of the plant is here, okay? So here's a problem statement for this. Over a period of 6 weeks during the summer, liquid had to be cleaned up off the floor in this area 4 times. So 4 times in a period of 6 weeks. The quantity of liquid varied, and the time between events was irregular. No rhyme or reason. However, the liquid always occurred on 3rd shift. Okay. So what we want to do with this, and you can see the layout here. There's the E-coat line, zinc line, powder line. Okay. Maintenance, lab, everything's pretty much laid out. Okay. So if we go back here, where would we want to start on our fishbone diagram as far as equipment? What type of equipment would we be wanting to investigate? And I know this might be a little difficult just pulling it out of the air as we're showing here, but I'll give a few hints. And if anybody wants to chime in as well, feel free to do so, and y'all can just interrupt me. But the tanks for the equipment, they hold up to 200 gallons. Could there have been a malfunction on the equipment? How does that liquid come out of those tanks? Maybe valves? Oh, maybe a broken float valve was discovered in the 3rd rinse tank. Okay, that's something to consider. Pumps, seals, valves. Wow, water, wastewater, I've seen it all with that. Pre-treatment especially, but any manufacturing line, they do fail. They do go wrong. Okay, the process, the 3rd rinse tank. So that's one area of potential area to where water or liquid, I should say, ends up on the floor. The process is itself. There's a 3rd rinse tank that must be manually filled with water. There's another scenario that could fail. The lab tech I mentioned, guess what he uses? A garden hose, okay? And usually the lab tech turns it on and leaves it running while performing other duties. That's a recipe for disaster, right?
And Don,
Overfills. Go
we
ahead.
have a comment that says the recurring time period for the third shift makes me think it's not an equipment problem. Excellent input.
Definitely, I agree. Yep. So the equipment being used, the process being used for the equipment, are leave them all open to that. And as we go down further, we may, isolate it to that third shift and perhaps a lab tech, poor lab tech. So another thing they do during the process are the rinse tanks. They are emptied, okay, from the previous tanks over to rid of the over contaminants and the rinse water. So again, another potential for liquid on the floor. Now, the people that we just mentioned, a lab tech. During summer vacations, only 2 lab techs are available to cover all 3 shifts. Wow, okay. Other employees do work on the powder coat line, but they do not deal with the tank chemistry. The failure in training, is it not? In job duties, in who's doing what. And some scenarios, especially for an inspection process with hazardous waste, when you have to have so many in-house inspections or to check out your storage area for hazardous waste. What about holidays? What about weekends if you're not 24/7 or 7 days a week? Do you have coverage for that? Well, same thing here. People go on vacation and you've got 3 shifts, but only 2 are covered. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. The materials in this case on the fishbone, well, we've got liquid. Okay, and we have water in there as well. And the environment, well, as we saw on the layout for this, the lab is on the other side of the layout from, say, the powder line. So you've got some walking to do. It may be out of view, especially if you are multitasking on that floor. The tanks, they're also situated such that they face the back wall. So they're not in the line of sight of the other lines, offices, or lab. And then on finally the management, lab techs report to both the E-coat and powder coat managers. Okay, so there's no cross training is done to be able to cover lab tech duties when they are short staffed. Just like the example I gave with hazardous waste and storage areas, if somebody else is going to do those inspections to make sure those containers have not been compromised during off hours or any time, have they been trained to identify that? Same thing here. So you can see if you apply the cause, in this case, equipment, process, people, materials, environment, management, and fill out your outline, going down, you will eventually come to not only the problem, but also how to solve that.
And then we had some input that wouldn't a lack of people power be a management issue?
Yes, indeed. Perhaps they don't have enough people to fill in because guess maybe they'll have to hire some more people. Who knows? Maybe staffing's just not adequate. Yes, indeed.
Excellent.
All right. So again, these, as far as determining your root cause, the tools are out there for you to use. It depends on how much in depth you'd like to get. Some are simple solutions. Your 5 whys is probably your first thing you want to jump on. And then, I know fishbone analysis is very common and popular, what we just went through. And yeah, the tools are out there for you to explore and utilize and see what works for you in your facility, in your layout. But okay. So if there's no other questions or comments, that wraps that up.
Not seeing any other questions. Wanted to let you guys know, I know we mentioned this earlier, but there are certificates in the handouts for today so that you can have those for your training records. All about that documentation.
Mhm.
If you want to download those and then fill them out, they are not pre-filled with your names on them, so make sure you fill it out with your name. And it's already signed by Marcia for you. So make sure you get those, and we really appreciate your input and participation in this webinar. We hope that it was valuable to you. There is a survey at the end. It might have popped up with the end of each of these webinars. If you haven't already filled it out, please take some time this afternoon to fill that out. And is there anything else we need to go over before we end?
No, for those of you our ESI members, if you haven't attended our module series on the 14,001, feel free to consider that. We go much more in depth. Again, this is an overview, just what it states. We also provide one. We began that last year. I believe we've already done it this year, haven't we, on 50,001
Yes.
overview as well on your energy management systems. But our module
And
series go much more in detail and much more in depth. We slice and dice up
mhm.
the standard, and it's really pretty cool how we can really dive in there. And they're one a month for about 6 months. Gives you plenty of chance to digest.
If you're interested in the 50,001 overview class, it is on our website under the past events, under the energy management series on our events page. So you can find it there. We also have an upcoming greenhouse gas series that we are presenting. It's actually going to be hosted by New Belgium Brewing and Duke Energies. I mean, not Duke Energy, excuse me, Duke
Duke
University.
University. Yep.
So if you're interested in that, let us know, and you can register through our website as well. And otherwise, thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you.
And we did have one comment. Someone was so
Oh,
excited about your sales pitch at the end. They said, "Where can we sign up?" Now I'm not sure which of the presentations they were speaking of, but if they could add that
excellent.
back in there. But
Let's see here. Um, is that lady? Is that how you pronounce it? Are you looking at the EMS class, or are you looking for the greenhouse gas class? Both. Okay, so the greenhouse gas one is open to everyone. So I'll send you that link. The let me see if I can put it. Let me go find it and see if I can put it in the chat. The EMS one is going to be open to ESI members only, and unfortunately, in order to be an ESI member, you do have to be in the state of North Carolina. I don't know if the state of Texas, because it looks like you're from Dallas,
Well,
has a similar program, but
there is a Dallas, North Carolina. So
oh,
I'm not sure if it's the same. So
excellent question. So if it's from the city of Dallas in Texas, then you might not be eligible to do the ESI class, the module class. But if you're from North Carolina, let us know. Let me grab this webinar link for you, and I will put that in the chat. Did we have any other questions?
And the greenhouse gas series will be just that, a series. July it kicks off, and we'll probably be one in the fall and a couple more next year, and hopefully it'll be a long-term series for us, part of our energy management program. So.
All right, so I just put that registration link in the chat. I'll give you guys a few minutes before we close out this webinar so that you can click on it, because once we close out this webinar, you won't have access to it. So it looks like you guys are in Texas. So yeah, the greenhouse gas series, welcome to attend. That would be awesome.
all right.
Thank you guys
Yeah.
again so much for attending. What were
Yeah.
you gonna say?
I was just going to say with the greenhouse series, Terry Albrecht's Waste Reduction Partners and Land of Sky, we will be collaborating with them.
Yeah.
So they've helped us put that series together. Very excited about it. So.
All right. Well, thank you guys again. Like I said, we'll hang out here for a little bit, leave the webinar up so that you can click on that link. But otherwise, we will see you guys later.
Y'all been great. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you all.